Mike Cavanaugh. This is another edition of Cavanaugh's Corner, the labor talk show in southern Maine, on public access television. This evening's show is going to be dedicated to a discussion with members of the Southern Maine chapter of the Labor Party. Now, many of you have not probably heard yet of the Labor Party, but I can tell you that the Labor Party is a group organizing here in Maine and many other cities and towns around the United States in response to a concern that many of us have that perhaps the needs of working people aren't fairly being represented and really being fought for by many politicians of both the major political parties, Democrat and Republican. The Labor Party, however, is not a party that's about trying to run candidates for office and at this stage is not interested in trying to contest for elected office. But the Labor Party is trying to raise the issues and make certain that the politicians who are running for office understand and respond to the issues that are of concern to working people. And I think the primary issue that's of concern to working people is the very issue that gives rise to the name working people, that is a job. For most people, having a job is essential to their identity. It's the way by which they're able to support themselves and their families. It's the major life activity that adults in this society aspire to. Yet for millions of Americans, having a job that pays a living wage and provides benefits is not a reality. We have the interesting phenomenon of people working more jobs. There are more jobs always being created, and many people who are working multiple jobs in order to make ends meet. The Labor Party, as you'll see in this evening's discussion, is talking about introducing the concept of a constitutional amendment. An amendment would be the 28th Amendment to the U.S. Constitution that would essentially require that every American have a right to a job, and a job at a living wage. Our history in the United States since the end of the Second World War has been really 3 attempts to deal with structural unemployment. Initially, the GI Bill of Rights that provided for many returning veterans an opportunity for not just a job but an education as a means to a job. There have then been 2 other pieces of legislation that have been proposed and passed at the federal level. One was the Full Employment Act of 1946 that was supposed to guarantee full employment as policy of the United States, and the other was the Humphrey-Hawkins bill, which had been debated in Congress for many years and passed in 1978 and signed into law by President Carter. That legislation also established full employment as a national goal. Yet, despite the fact that both of those bills were passed and signed into law, neither of them has had any teeth, and no one believes that the policy of the United States is to ensure that every person who wants a job and is capable of working has a job. In fact, quite the opposite is true. We saw last week the Federal Reserve Board raise interest rates in response to what they consider to be a potential inflationary trend in the economy, with wages going up and unemployment going down. The official policy seems more to be to guarantee that there's a level of unemployment in our society. So the Labor Party is taking a case to the people to suggest that the way in which to really make public policy in this country is by amending the Constitution. There have been 27 amendments passed to the Constitution, starting with the original 10 amendments of the Bill of Rights. It is the intention of the Labor Party to raise the issue of a right to a job at a living wage as a matter of right of citizenship. That, in my opinion, will create a very interesting debate in this country as to what would it mean if such an act was passed as an amendment to the Constitution. What would that mean for businesses in this country? What would that mean for education? What would that mean for our policy for all the citizenry? But it's the Labor Party that's beginning this discussion, and we have an opportunity here on Cavanaugh's Corner to look at one of the very early founding meetings of the Labor Party members here in southern Maine. And this evening they are joined by the regional organizer for the Labor Party for New England, Mr. Ed Bruno, who's come up to Maine here at the end of March to engage in a discussion about full employment and the constitutional amendment for full employment. So, with that, let's tune in to this first meeting brought to you live through tape on Cavanaugh's Corner, Labor Party.
That we are sure of one thing, which is that if we're going to have a working class, working people's party, we've got to have something to say about jobs and wages. We just have to have something to say about it. And it can't be, frankly, raise the minimum wage a little bit, or let's steal 5 jobs from Massachusetts and bring them into Maine, because that's where they really ought to be. It's going to have to be something much more fundamental than that. And that really, in a nutshell, is why we're talking about elevating the question of jobs and wages to a constitutional level. And I'll get back to that in a minute. Now, after having said that, of course, people's eyes go right up in their forehead. And they say, well, let's see now, that'll take about 48 years. And then what, you know? And what do we do in the meantime? And what do we do besides that? And so that, and of course we understand that, right? I mean, that's no news to anybody. It's not meant to be that the campaign for a 28th Amendment, incidentally, it took us a long time to figure out how many amendments. This started out to be the campaign for the 25th Amendment. We kept finding more and more, but we're sure that there are 27. That this is meant to be...
Hope you didn't get your information off the internet.
No, we nailed it. right to the source. Right. It is meant to be the thing that the party does in addition to everything else that you might choose to do. And if it's handled the right way, it would enhance everything else that we do. So maybe, for example, the party in Connecticut is pushing a living wage ordinance in New Haven. There's a lot of problems with living wage ordinances. But at least it gets you in the door. It starts the discussion. And then as the second thing, they're saying, and we've got to start talking about job creation, wage maintenance, and so forth as a constitutional question. And they figure out ways of bringing this campaign along behind the living wage thing. So that we purposely designed this thing to do 2 things, none of which have to do with getting an amendment in the Constitution. A way of building membership in the party, and a way of forcing us, if you will, all units of the party, all affiliated unions, to get on the grassroots level and stay there, so that you're not going to go running off to the Boston Globe trying to convince them that this constitutional amendment's a good idea, because it ain't going to work. They won't be convinced, and they'll ask us all the questions that make us sound stupid. Right? Like, how soon are you going to get it? You know, is the U.S. senators in Massachusetts in favor of it? I mean, all of these things. See, what we think we need to be doing is we got to be talking door to door, union halls, retirees groups, Monument Square passerbyers, block clubs, anti-toxic clubs, anything that you can get your hands on. We've got to be talking about there's got to be an alternative to steadily decreasing wages and steadily vanishing jobs. And one possible way of doing this is to elevate this to a constitutional level, and then forcing the question of legislation and so forth that will figure out ways of making this economy work for everybody. That's an old idea, incidentally. So that it's seen first as the calling card campaign for this party. It's seen as the most fundamental thing that we can say about jobs and wages. And it is not seen as the only thing that you would go and do. It's meant to be something that will be ongoing for the foreseeable future. It's meant to be something that will be down at the level that we think this party has to operate on. No lobbying to be done on this thing. Who are you going to lobby? And what are you going to lobby for? This is down here, door-to-door work, so forth and so on. So that the structure of the campaign is really around 2 things. One is a petition, and we got a little rule that we are going to enforce. This will be the only enforced national rule we have so far, besides the no electoral one, is If you decide, for example, to put this petition and go door to door in, let's just say, Ward 5 in Portland, I don't know if there is such a thing, you cannot take it to the alderman who represents Ward 5 in Portland until you get 10% of the voters on the petition. You know, we don't want people running over to see their cousin-in-law, the alderman. We want this to be done street by street, block by block, door by door. So you can use the petitions as long as we don't get any bright ideas that we're going to go right over from where we are tonight to ballot referendums and city council resolutions. That's not what we want to do. The other way of moving this campaign along is with a resolution, which I think has a lot of potential. A little resolution that we could bring to all kinds of groups, not just unions. Do two things. Gives us an opportunity to speak, talk about the Labor Party, talk about jobs, talk about wages, and then ask them to support the campaign for 28th Amendment, and to, if they're willing to pass the petition around through their own organizations. Leaving the organizational thing for a minute, let me just go over to a couple of fundamental arguments that are worth knowing about. I think the first one is on the Constitution itself. It's important, I think, to say to people, to give them a context, that every point in our country when we have expanded rights from the beginning, which was, in the beginning, white male property owners were the only ones that had rights. We have done this constitutionally through an amendment. That's the way we have done business in our country. And whether it was the right of women to vote, or the right of non-property owner males to vote, or the right, of course, of blacks to vote and to end slavery and so forth and so on, we have taken the constitutional amendment avenue of doing this. It is not a strange concept. That's how we do it. And what we are saying, because we think this party should be saying it, is we've gotten to the point in our economy where the question of jobs and wages should be elevated to a constitutional level, And we propose to do that with a simple sentence that says every person shall have the right to a job and to receive a living wage for their work. Understanding that just like the right to free speech, once that's in the Constitution, the fight begins. In other words, then it becomes a whole question of enabling legislation, of figuring out what indeed does that mean. How does the government enforce such a thing? And that's really where the excitement to this thing has been. For example, in New Bedford, Massachusetts, we have a meeting of the Labor Party chapter down there. It doesn't take much jogging to get people thinking about all of the jobs that need to be done and all of the jobs that have been lost out of that city, and start to put two and two together and say, you know, you mean to tell me that when such and such a plant closed down, either maybe we might have taken it by eminent domain and kept it here if it was healthy, or if we couldn't keep it here, maybe there would be an exit tax levied on these guys to fund jobs for the people who have remained back here in New Bedford, or maybe, and people start to rattle off a million different things. I can't get elderly care for my mother. I can't get daycare for my child. I can't get, I mean, there's 100 things that come from this kind of discussion. It's the discussion that we really want to have. That's where the meat of this thing lies. As one example, we have been using, mostly to groups of people that are too young to remember this, including me. At the end of World War II, we redefined work to mean school. And we sent 8 million people to school, and we paid them, right? We said, remember, right, the GI Bill of Rights. We said, don't go into the factories. Go to school, any degree will pay all the costs, all the tuition, and a living allowance as long as you stay there. Now we say that we simply redefined what work meant. And you see, we could redefine what work meant. That's a question of political will. It's a question of political will. We could redefine work to mean quality daycare. We could define it to mean quality elderly care. We could define it to mean environmental cleanup. We can define work to mean all kinds of necessary social things if we care to. Now, granted, right after World War II, you had a lot of returning veterans. Incidentally, just about the same number of unemployed as there are today. One of the differences, of course, is the returning veterans had guns. Right? So there was pressures, but be that as it may. See, we got to start moving this question about what happens now that if there's a clear disconnect in our economy between profits and growth and jobs. And in fact, in most cases, profits and economic growth have been going up and jobs have been going exactly the opposite. One goes north and the other goes south. And nobody has a solution to that. Nobody has a solution to that. And that's really the guts of this campaign. Shorter work week would be one partial solution to that. What happened to the shorter work week? Transitional funds for people to do necessary work, either under private or public auspices. This is not necessarily a case of the government hires everybody. It's a case of what does it take in this kind of an economy to generate employment. So it's those kinds of things that this thing gets us to. There's some little packets of information that I would be happy to give you that talk about a variety of other things. Those of us who are trade unionists, for example, there's this little graph here that's really very interesting. This is Alan Greenspan's latest poll that shows 46.5% of the employed people fear for their jobs. Yeah. And with good reason, right? It's not like this is a fool's belief. But this thing has some real power. I mean, and this is not aimed, incidentally, at poor people and at unemployed people, although certainly they would play a role in this. This goes right to the heart of those who are currently employed at relatively decent jobs. So, those are some of the things that this little booklet talks about. Clearly, we've got a long way to go yet before we're going to be able to handle all the questions that come about. My experience is, I didn't even begin to handle any of these questions until I started to go out and talk to people. Right? And my own union members is interesting. Didn't raise any of these things I just talked about. I guess that's it. What, you mean to tell me that guy in the back who's been cutting air, instead of metal for the last 25 years can't be fired? I said, well, he ain't being fired now, right? I mean, the union hasn't been fired yet. Why are you worried about this? Well, I don't think it's right. You mean everybody going to sit down on the job? This amendment passes. Interesting. Somebody else gets up and says, well, wait a minute. That means every person from every foreign country is going to come to this country. Right? I mean, there's a million things out there, right, that we're not even touching on yet. But push come to shove, people certainly agree with us on the position that there ain't enough jobs, and the ones we got are in danger, and wages ain't anywhere high enough and haven't been going up. Incidentally, we are talking about $10 an hour. Naturally, the amendment itself wants to talk about a living wage. But we are suggesting that $10 an hour would be considered a living wage in today's climate. So I'm going to stop here. There's a million things we could talk about. Let's talk about stuff that you want to talk about.
I just wanted to raise one question based on what Arthur had said earlier, because I think it's, I may very well break rule number one. I mean, I think one of the things that, number one being the one that you can't take it up the ladder very far, rather than the campaign supporting having people run for office. I mean, I think one of the things that people are going to confront in the state, and maybe it was behind what Arthur was saying, is that, I don't know if he still is, but he's either the Democratic chair of Westbrook, or he might as well be or something. And same thing for other people that we work with all the time. Or he has been for the last 30 years or something. So that naturally people, if you take it, and I think in organized labor in Maine, that tends to be the case. I don't know if people are on the state committee and people work on every level. I mean, it isn't just a matter of being a bureaucrat. And also, there are a number of state legislatures, people that will get elected to office are just like, come out of a meeting like this with 3 or 4 people and they run, and it's not, these are people you associate with rather than lobby. Not that we don't lobby other people. But it's quite likely that people are going to find themselves, in the Democratic meeting of a particular town. And so the question is, you raise this as an issue within that forum and say, does this group going to support this, both as individuals and as a group. And I think it's quite natural and
Yeah, I
likely
don't
to
think
come
there's
up
anything
that.
wrong with that. I'm more worried, frankly, I don't think we'd see it quite so much in a kind of an informal democratic state like this. I'll give you an example from Pennsylvania. Some big service employee worker unions are affiliates in Pennsylvania. And of course, because of the kind of work they do, they're public employees, they get all kind of relationship with all kind of Democratic Party office holders. Their first instinct is to run to them with this thing. And see, we say, Jesus, guys, we want to build a party. We don't want to really lobby 5 county commissioners on this question, see, and we've got to guard against that. There's no substitute, and I think I'm preaching to the choir on this one, there's no substitute for talking to working people, preferably where they can spend a little time in their kitchens, about these kinds of issues. That's how we're going to build this thing and bring people into a party.
If we were successful, this would dramatically change the nature of the society. I mean, just this whole structure. It would be a different country. And how are we going to meet those questions? I think we really have to think of possible worlds here. How would this change if we were successful in Maine, for instance? How would it change Maine structurally, economically? This is a big deal.
No,
and it's great. And the more I think about it, it would drastically change. Talk about redistribution of wealth. I mean, it would have to happen. And when these people ask about, in a society which doesn't normally think of the common good, and you have the individuals saying, well, that guy's going to make $10 for sitting on his ass, we have to, I don't know, there's a process of education. We have to educate ourselves. What do we see? If this were successful, what kind of country would it be 20 years from now? Totally different. Talk about superstructure and about the whole at every level. Culturally, it would be a different society, and some great things could happen. But I'm wondering, are we prepared as we go out to talk about this to think about those questions? Or should we begin brainstorming?
My answer to it, and it isn't much of an answer, I will grant you, is the best discussions I've had on that have been in meetings in places like Pittsfield, Mass, and Lynn, and so forth. In other words, it seems like to me, by taking it in small bites, and because right away, people go right over to the discussion, what would that mean in Lynn? That's probably the place to really start to look at it. For example, using this New Bedford thing, it happened, this is the short form of the story, it happened that a plant in my own union was bought and shut down and moved to Georgia. It was a healthy plant. It had been there for 110 years, and every one of the 110 years it had made a profit. There was nothing wrong with the plant except that the owners wanted to bring it home to Georgia, bring it back to their home in Georgia. We began a eminent domain campaign and came one vote shy of having the city of New Bedford take the damn thing over. That's an old trick of ours. We've done that 3-4 times. We've never won it yet. But see, so right away there's a pool of UE members in New Bedford who understand the limitations that you got to go and try to get eminent domain and blah 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 and this and that. So right away their discussion starts right there. Geez, the government would have been on our side in this case of that plant. There was no reason for that plant to go. Maybe one thing would have happened if this amendment was enforced, is the government would have taken that plant, kept it here, and found another owner. That's a fairly straightforward thing. And then the discussion begins, well, but it went, and now there's 110 of us and we don't have jobs. But maybe there should have been a way of taking a little bit of that money from that company and putting it into job funds. And then people started to say, well, maybe what there ought to be is the city of New Bedford would be responsible for having an inventory of necessary jobs that need doing. And that becomes a function of the government, not necessarily to fill the jobs, but to say, well, that plant left, we're going to fund the job trust fund by doing this, this, and this, and we'll put those 110 people to work doing, this list of jobs that we have in our backlog of inventory necessary services. I don't know, but that kind of discussion is a fascinating one to have.
But kind of off the subject here a little bit, but one of the things that I heard tonight that I didn't understand before was that it was going to be more grassroots. And where you're going for a national, a constitutional amendment, and you're not going to use big media to do that, what is the relationship with the media going to be if you're not going to be real proactive with the media? The media can slice you and dice you in 15 minutes.
Yeah.
What is our relationship with the media, say even with this local going out and collecting signatures, and do you interview with the media? Do you do it all kind of clandestine? I mean, I guess that's where I'm getting a little bit confused. And you're not going to use that tool, or?
I'd rather ask, let's ask the media.
Oh, that's the media.
All the rules, right?
I mean, that's one thing. This is, our meetings are on the Labor Channel in Biddeford.
Oh, okay.
Well, it's a work in progress.
We had a coup down there.
Do we have enough cards?
Mike Cavanaugh's corner to the Labor Channel. He does all the work. I mean, no, I think the idea is that it isn't we don't do media events. That we clearly want the media to cover what we're doing, and they'll know. I mean, we'll tell them when we want, when we think it's appropriate, and do all those kinds of things, but it'll be based on the actual work that we're doing rather than trying to, they say politics is the art of perception, and all you have to do is to get people to perceive by watching TV and stuff. I don't think that's our approach. Our approach is actually to go out and create the discussion so people start dreaming about what could this country look like in 20 years if this was to happen, and to create that discussion. So it's not like we're anti-media, it's just that we're not into spin control. We want to put, what we want to say to the media is the same thing we say to everybody else. And not really have any not really distinguish.
See, part of it, I don't want to, director of organization lecture, but I'm going to make a little bit of one. We're so screwed up, if you would, in how we do our politics, that we see it right through the lens of getting a media event, getting our message out. Frankly, I don't know how many people pay any attention to that stuff anyway. And I don't think any one of us would invite one of these professional spinners into our living room if we had a choice. They generally are nasty characters, right? So our media, we got to have a media strategy, but it should be tied very closely to the level of what we are trying to organize here. And the people, I would suspect, in my own home city, that many of us in Boston read the Boston Globe. It's the biggest newspaper. But I don't believe that we are moved one way or another what that Boston Globe reports. And in fact, we pay much more attention. In my neighborhood, for example, there are 2 neighborhood weeklies. Getting a story in there is probably worth much more to us than all of the sweat and strain of getting into the Boston Globe, trying to spin the story right, get the guy to report it the way we want it said. And when you're all said and done, I question the organizational payoff for all that effort, let alone television and all the other stuff. On the other hand, if we keep our media strategy, at the level that we can handle it, cable television, radio talk shows, neighborhood papers, the free penny advertisers, that kind of stuff, by all means. But I think we don't get carried away with ourselves as if we are going to get this thing passed anytime soon. See, and then we end up looking and sounding stupid. We get in a big thing, we have to puff it all up. Thousands of people are, blah, 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 the people win again. Right? And it's just so much junk, That's what we got to be careful about. And that's our reactions on the politics is going to tend to be, let's lobby somebody, let's get it in the press, generally speaking. And I suspect that the bigger the state, the bigger the city, the more temptation that will be. The bigger the union, the more that temptation will be. The SEIU, which is an affiliate in Boston, the biggest statewide SEIU local in Massachusetts, of course has good relations with the Boston City Council. But that's, for our purposes, that's kind of beside the point. We don't need good relations with the Boston City Council right now.
So let's go to another question that, well, you actually raised it, that, we know it's going to come up someplace soon. That is that, all this is going to do is, how is this it's gonna protect the people that don't work anyway? How would you respond to that?
I've heard a couple good answers to that. I'm curious.
Arthur took the first one. He had the first softball. Now who's going to hit the hard ball? And how would you respond? You get that in the street tomorrow.
I guess personally, I think people that don't work, you would actually put them to work, similar to what the programs of the 30s did, the WPA and CCC. I mean, created projects that need to be done. I mean, we all know right in this country currently, the infrastructure is in shambles. Why aren't we creating those jobs that need to be done? And this is a way to do it, putting those people to work. And the people that are on welfare, you're taking them off and you're putting them to work at a livable wage. And I relate it back to the 30s, what happened. That's what those programs did.
I immediately saw one of the other things that concerns me, and just today's headline is, Mike Liberty standing up saying,
Kavanaugh on the same page.
well, not only is the other saying age, but I mean, I'm starting to mix those two up. They start to look a lot alike. But one of the really, it's an issue that needs to be talked about is that they gave back to keep those 300 jobs in Biddeford at that textile mill, to pay homage to Chainsaw Al Dunlop. They paid with wages and benefits that probably are not even $10 an hour. I don't know what the median wage is at Bates, to be honest. Not the Bates Mill, but I mean at the...
Biddeford textile.
Huh?
Was it about 11?
I think so, but
The median wage is 11?
I think it's about 11.
Oh, okay.
So
Well, then, no,
down
then-
below 10, yeah.
Yeah.
Now it's less than 10.
Right, now it's less than 10. So I'm just saying that, in this state of Maine, I mean, we really are, even though there's been a study that says that a living wage should be $11.26, and there's the other talk of the $10 wage, but I think that is one of the things you are going to run into is, wait a minute, that's an awful lot of money, $10 an hour.
I mean, I remember somebody saying, well, like, we can't afford it. And I remember saying, like, we aren't going to pay for it either. I mean, it's obviously going to come out of progressive taxation and eliminating, like, corporate welfare. Like, we said at a certain level, we're saying, it means the state of Maine isn't going to spend $300 million to subsidize the Bath Iron Works. Or if it does, we're going to own the dry dock. I mean, it's not going to be those kind of deals. I mean, we're already sort of funneling a lot of money over, but we don't have any control. At least, I don't know, that's how I think of it, or that, people can come in, or, companies can come in and set up shop here, and then, they can buy the parts to make cars here at inflated prices, so they don't end up paying taxes here. Or, General Motors can do that, General Electric can do that. I mean, government, that's all perfectly legal, and in a certain sense, that stuff would have to stop. So, I don't know. I don't know if that's a good one.
I like, my response is usually similar to Bob's, in that it's like there's the myth of the lazy worker. I mean, it's true, you're going to have 1% of the population doesn't want to work. What's new about that? You always have that and always will. But if you look back in the 30s during the Depression, the state of California put up guards to keep people out, to keep all these lazy, no-good people from Oklahoma from coming into California, right? And then all of a sudden the war starts and the war industry starts cranking up, and California sends people to Oklahoma to get them to come to California to work in the defense industry, and nobody was considered shiftless. But when there was high unemployment, you had a lot of shiftless people, right? Then all of a sudden you get lots of work and nobody's shiftless, everybody wants to work. And the fact is, I think in most of our experiences is, most people actually want to work and they want a job, and that's why this is important, because we need to guarantee that people who want to work will have work. Because that's what we want to do with our lives, is have a decent job, have something to say about what we do with those jobs, but also we want to be able to contribute something to the society. And most people fall in that category. And that's who we're concerned with. I mean, if 1% of the people want to be lazy, that's their problem. We're concerned with the 99%.
I heard somebody say too, I think, which is a good, just that. I think most times when this has come up, people say, hey, look, most everybody we know want to work. And every time there's a job opening, 50 job openings, 1,000 people line up for it. We see it time and time again. But they say those small percentage of people that opt out of this, they opt out of it. They will go and hustle for a living. Because there isn't any, in other words, if you've got the right to a job at a living wage, there aren't any other things that says, unless of course you're disabled or, blind and so forth. There isn't any so-called welfare or anything else. You can partake of the right to work, or you don't. It's not going to, I don't suspect it'll be compulsory. It's like freedom of speech. It's not compulsory that we speak, right? That nobody can infringe on our right to do that. I think that's part of it.
With currently, like you said, 50 job openings and 1,000 show up. And that's what has happened throughout corporate America, because corporate America has convinced everyone that it's a privilege to have a job. You're lucky to have a job, and that's why so many show up. And we're trying to reverse that and saying it's a right. If you have a job, it's a right to be paid a livable wage, like it is in many other countries. Just like health insurance should be a right, like it is in 19 of the largest 21 industrialized countries. It's a right, except here in South Africa. And so we need to use that equation. But a lot of people are going to ask, well, if we try to make it such a livable wage, a guaranteed wage for everyone, what's going to happen? Corporations are just going to leave here. On the flip side, what's been happening for the last 15 years? They're leaving here. Even if they have $5, $6 an hour jobs, they're ready to leave. So,
See, one of the things that nobody, I don't think...
and I think Peter hit it, though, stop the corporate welfare that enables them to leave.
Could I try another objection to this? Say I'm nearing retirement, and I've got my pension fund is in a mutual fund. Now, I'd read the...
You're heading for a fall as it is.
I'm reading the newspapers of the past week. I'm not very smart, but I've kind of realized that stock market comes down a little bit when inflation, but I realize that inflation is kind of a code word for more jobs. So what they mean by inflation is that the unemployment rate fell point something or other. So I go, my pension depends upon having 6% unemployed all the time. So we come back to what you were, that we're talking basic change around here.
Well, we probably aren't going to appeal to you.
Huh?
I don't think we're going to satisfy the bondholders on this one.
Well, no, I don't mean the bondholders. I mean somebody who's a teacher and has,
See, I think that opens the door to another just great discussion.
Right.
Because then we can start talking about the prudent man rule too. I mean, while we're eliminating things, see if we one of the reasons all that works that way, right, is because all this pension fund money gets invested in, if you can call it investment, into stocks, into Fortune 500 companies, which just raises, the value of the stock. But that capital isn't going into building buildings or anything else. It's just changing hands and somebody's making some money. And in some point in time, you might get a little bit of it if you're lucky. Stock market doesn't crash. But if we start thinking about what's necessary to create full employment in this country, then we're going to have to start taking our pension funds, getting rid of the prudent man rule, and the Taft-Hartley rules, which say that unions are not allowed to invest, are not allowed to control their own pension funds, and start putting that capital into things that create jobs, into factories, into the infrastructure and that kind of stuff. I hate to spring the prudent man rule on anybody who didn't care about it before.
But it doesn't take too much to get into some basics.
So that's
An old folk singer once said, know your song well before you sing it. And what I'm wondering here is that, are we going to reach some consensus on answers? I mean, we're not going to go out there and have 20 different answers for one question. Are we going to set some basic principles here that we go out at local levels or state levels to answer some of these questions? Because I think we have to reach some agreement as to how we're going to answer each question. We have to know our song. Is there any thought of doing that, of reaching?
We've left it up to go to wherever people are comfortable. For example, if you were going to go and knock on doors, I think you probably have to be prepared for a longer discussion than if you're going to try to stop people crossing a busy square in downtown Portland. In fact, I'd be kind of curious to see how much of what happens if you do stop somebody in such a thing. They're not going to talk for very long, right? So I don't know even what you lead with on that one. But it gets to be that very much that different. If you were going to go to the 340 retirees meeting, you probably would start with a different,
Yeah, you definitely want to have a more in-depth, you'd want to have, I hate to say well rehearsed, but you really would want to have to, you wouldn't want to be up there making, some sort of, let's hang all the people on Wall Street. That's the problem, and not be able to explain that exactly that way, or a variation of the way that we've just discussed it here, about the relationship of workers and pension funds, and why is everybody in mutual funds these days? Why are there now more defined benefit plans? Why is everybody speculating on Wall Street? Why is the stock market up at 6,000? What is the relationship to retirees, and how will that affect them? I think that is he was just saying, if we're going to be talking to retirees. I like the idea, though, of what you were talking about, the whole idea of after World War II, because I truly believe that was sort of like a Marshall Plan for the United States. And I've heard it, talked about that ways, is that not only did we do we did the 52 weeks, we did the 52 weeks for the vets return, and the unemployment, the college, the VA loans for building houses. That's where all the suburbs were built. We built we started to build the infrastructure, the 95s and the highways in this country, the interstates. That all started to happen. TVAs, all of those things are really prudent ways to invest in this country, to make this country as great as it has become. Those things were done, as a matter of fact, on the return of this. And so it was great things were accomplished in times of need.
Those are powerful examples, too. Don't forget that in many, many times we're going to be talking to people who spent their adult lives in times that they don't even know what a pension is. And we need to harken back to some basic examples of, like the GI Bill. That's why that GI Bill of Rights has been so powerful, and because remember, we're going to be talking to folks nowadays who go to work on jobs that don't provide any health insurance and don't provide any retirement, and here we are talking about what some of us still remember as being things you used to get when you went to work, right? So, I think that's part of it. I think, though, in the end, if we don't wander too far away from this basic thing, which almost everybody agrees with us about, that we have been on a steady 25-year race to the bottom on wages. There is no denying that.
Yeah.
No denying it. And we haven't gained any jobs that most any of us can do. We might have gained some jobs that very particular people can do, in information processing or this, that, or the other. But it's been Biddeford, New Bedford, New Bedford, time after time after time. And that's everybody's experience. We take a loss and a loss, and like somebody was saying, well, they'll all run overseas. Most people would say, oh, what's new? See, and when you push on these empty suits that are running around, the other interesting thing I think to stay close to is nobody is offering an answer. Nobody is offering anything that is sensible about what are we going to do about wages, and what are we going to do about jobs. Mostly it doesn't get talked about, or if it does, these mystical figures of, we created 11 million jobs in X number of years kind of stuff comes out, See, and I think that's in the guts of it, is the power of this thing. Most people agree with us on that. Then you've got to start to open some of these doors, and that almost depends on where that person you're talking to, what door they choose to open. In many cases, it's an interesting thing.
I just think that and you raised it earlier, the question of bringing this question with a clipboard and a button on Monument Square, I'm starting to see that it's going to be difficult.
That's tough. That's a tough way.
It's going to be difficult. I can't see going to the Student Union of USM. I can't see going to, a more But trying to get people on the street in the one show when they're rushing, I mean, I just think it's going to be difficult, unless it's, unless there's an event there, unless it's Workers' Memorial Day, or if it's going to be the Martin Luther King wreath laying or something like that. But just to be there, or even to be at the mall, I think it's going to be, I'm just,
We don't have to worry about the mall.
we're not, I know, but maybe a little bit.
I don't think,
question ahead.
see, I don't think it was, I think Patrick hit on it at the last meeting. I mean, it's really, these are not technical questions. I mean, we can have all these technical discussions, really not the prudent man rule. And it was a way, it came up a little bit at, I was with John at one of his, a couple of his classes yesterday. And I think- Subcontracting, yeah. And actually, I think it was one of your students, Patrick, who you didn't get through to. But he, this kid raised a question about DaCosta, right? And, why the legislature isn't doing stuff, that. So we talked about it a little bit, and then he said, well, so I talked about, well, just take away his right to do business. I mean, he violates human rights. Why should he do business in the state of Maine? Read the Constitution. I mean, that's what the legislature should do, is just, yank his right to do business. And the kid said something about, well, he does $70 million worth of business in the state. And I said, hey, I mean, I did answer the technical question, but basically I said, you want to have, you want to have human rights, or are you going to have property rights? That's it. I mean, it isn't always worded exactly that way, but the question is, this is a discussion about what we want to base our society on. I mean, all these programs that we talk about that came out of the New Deal, those are all deficit spending, and I'm sure people were crying about the budget isn't balanced, but I think what the real question was is all these old people were friggin' dying because they didn't have any food. So, I mean, we need to get back to just the basic questions and keep bringing it back to that.
One of the things that you guys have not raised, and I would venture it's because it hasn't hit the state yet, the question of workfare is really the lead in many, many locations. You're talking about
What do you mean it
almost,
hasn't hit the state?
I don't know. See, New York City, for example, there's 40,000 workfare recipients on the public payroll. Well, not the public payroll.
It's
That's the
essentially
problem.
hit every state with food stamps.
Uh-huh.
Because
But are they placing people now in public jobs and so forth?
But if you don't, in order to get food stamps, if you're not out looking for work, you have to do 24 hours a month.
Volunteer.
So-called volunteer work.
Right.
And that's, I guess, the whole country now, right? I think. That's federal.
So,
Yeah.
so.
That's the minimum. I mean, then there's
And
all
people
kinds of
going
other
on,
levels.
yeah. Perfect example of these guys not thinking through. Everybody values work, and then they force these folks into situations where there is no work, except you have to displace, in New York's case, highly paid transit workers, right? I mean,
Just like
CTA,
labor.
LCIO can organize workfare workers.
some unions say they're going to. They should, they certainly should. On the other hand, some unions, one of the things in the transit work is talk about brain dead. The big solution there is so that you don't have the workfare worker doing the union worker's work. The workfare worker wears a different colored vest than the union worker. Jesus Christ, guys, I mean, so that this is very much up for grabs on who does what and where it goes, and keeping in mind that the federal legislation preempts all state legislation. These people are not to be paid in wages. This shoe hasn't dropped yet, and the only reason I'm raising it is this thing, boy, goes right to the heart of that workfare stuff.
A little bit to this GI thing after World War II. It was not from the goodness of the government's heart that they gave these people a GI Bill. It was these people who came back from the war who said, no way are we going back to the old way that we used to live. They had just come through the depressions of the 30s. And they said, we've seen it. We need it. We want some of the goodies. And the GIs, and with Rosie the Riveter, joined forces. And there was no turning back. They did it with their politicians and with the labor unions, because the unions became very prominent in the late 40s and 50s. And they did it.
And we had
And they did it. They didn't do it by a soft touch. They did it with radicalism.
They forced the question.
asking enforcing questions. We had a volunteer to pull something together, and a really good idea to do something on May Day. Although, what May Day is during the week.
Thursday.
We wanted to have some kind of get-together on like Saturday, the following Saturday. Is that what we're going to do? That might be the day that we try to maybe leaflet down and go have a little picnic at the Eastern Prom or something. And the reason, I'll give John's, a little bit of John's rap, or half of his rap anyways. The rationalization.
the whole rap.
No, this is on the rationalization, was that we were talking about the origins of Labor Day and the origins of May Day. And Labor Day came before May Day, just to straighten that one out. But May Day essentially was, that's often a big debate in labor circles, right? So I just thought we'd straighten that out now. That's rule number one. Labor Day came before May Day, but May Day is more important. That's rule number two. But we were talking about...
May Day's Law Day, it's some sort of buddy.
It's loyalty.
Loyalty Day, there you go.
May Day was a way, it was very appropriate. I thought the way we were talking about it was very appropriate for what we're trying to do, because if we understand the history right, which we may not.
I got the facts.
John's got the facts, I just got the bullshit, which is basically that people used May Day to talk about the 8-hour day. That was the day that they really focused on, the 8-hour day, and the 8-hour day movement focused on May Day. And we may begin to try, we can, just start doing it informally this time, but to use May Day as a way to focus on the 28th Amendment.
Get spooked on this thing. We really are desperate for experience on this. Good, bad, or indifferent. I don't think we should be afraid of this. I mean, we're talking to people like ourselves. The worst somebody says is, that's the stupidest thing I've ever heard in my life. So what? This is going to be the first time, particularly those of us in unions. Right? I mean, many of us have gotten up in front of thousands and had people say that. Right? I have. I mean, it doesn't kill you, So, but we've got to start to use this stuff and then shape this thing. We know that the guts of this is right. But it's the shaping of it that remains to be done. And there's no reason to sitting in some room somewhere and try to shape it. You've got to go out, mix it up a little bit, come back, say, well, this leaflet doesn't work, or this, or whatever. And then we keep shaping this, because when we get this right, it's not right yet, but when we get it right, it will be a very powerful thing.
The next month or so, I'm going to be really tied up as far as the Human Services. I've got a seminar coming up, a workshop with Concanon scheduled for April 28th. I have a meeting with the Human Services Tuesday morning. And I also co-chair of a People's Educational Forum in Sanford. And we're very involved with the poor people and the unemployed people. And we're trying to educate them as to the means to find a job, be aware of what's going on politically. I would have some opportunities to sign up a few people, because I already have 2 people who said they will join the Labor Party.
Excellent.
And I'm sure that I could convince others. Because I don't know if you're familiar with working with the poor people. I've been involved with the poor people now for 6 years in a free meal kitchen in Sanford. And I get around talking to many of these people who are unemployed, able-bodied people, and they're talking radical. They're saying, how? What happens to the Labor Party when the revolution comes?
I hope you do away with it. Grab on to the levers of power yourself.
You're watching Cavanaugh's Corner, the labor talk show in Southern Maine on public access television. What you've just seen is a meeting of the Labor Party Southern Maine chapter of the emerging Labor Party here, discussing the proposal of a 28th Amendment to the U.S. Constitution, an amendment that would guarantee the right to a job at a living wage for every American. Interesting discussion, a very interesting issue. And you may be hearing more about this here in the southern Maine region over the course of the next few months. You may be asked by a representative of the Labor Party to make a presentation about this to your local union meeting, or perhaps your civic organization, church group, or whatever. You may also be approached by people on the street corners with petitions, signing petitions to begin the process of amending the Constitution. It's a long and involved process, but it's one that goes directly to the grassroots, and we'll ask each citizen to participate in deciding whether or not to amend our Constitution, as it's been amended 27 times before. The question is, should we amend it to provide a right to a job at a living wage? If you're interested in finding out more about the constitutional amendment activities of the Labor Party, you're certainly welcome to attend a Labor Party meeting. And to find out the date, place, and time of the next meeting, you can call 676-3356, 676-3356, and Peter will be happy to tell you and invite you to the next meeting of the Labor Party. All ideas are welcome, and we'd appreciate hearing yours. So, thank you for tuning in to Cavanaugh's Corner, and we look forward to joining with you on the next show. Good night.
Your name?
Ed Bruno, from the United Electrical Workers and from the Labor Party.
Right. You were talking earlier about the GI Bill and redefining work and all of that. There was a study done by the U.S. Senate in 1988 that looked at the outcome, the economic outcomes of the GI Bill.
Yeah.
Could you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, this thing really is the guts of what we think would be the enabling legislation to put the constitutional amendment into effect. That when you think about the GI Bill and the fact that it redefined work, it put people who had no jobs to work being students, and it paid them all their costs and all of their living expenses while they were students. That really wasn't a cost, it was an investment. And what the study said is for every dollar invested in a GI education, society got back $6.90 for every dollar invested in increased productivity and increased taxes paid by a higher paid worker and so forth and so on. And it seems like to us that really is the key question here, that this business of putting people to work is not a cost, it's an investment, and it pays back. And you can think of this in all kinds of terms. Think about what would be the investment in child care. The payoff in that would be huge. What would be the investment in more education? We got plenty of people who could use another GI Bill of Rights for education. So that's what the study showed. It's a ratio of a dollar spent for $6.90 returned, and we think that can be done under this constitutional amendment in 100 different ways. It's just a question of being creative